question, kind of what you were talking about, because before I came to college, I was, for the majority, self-taught on technique. I didn't have private lessons until I needed to find repertoire to get into college. And then I pretty much found repertoire, and my lesson instructor basically discouraged me from continuing the music because she said I wasn't going to be good enough to make it into college. So I stopped taking lessons until I actually got into college. Much cite what she said, but well, not much. I barely made. Anyways, how do you address somebody that has all of those? Like, because I'm self-taught, so I know I have a lot of different technical problems, and people that have had lessons since they were 8 or 9 years old, you know, that kind of thing, or even since middle school, or even high school. But how do you address people that have their own problems, like not problems that they typically get, but their own problems?
How are those different?
Well, I don't know why, but I seem to, from what I hear from Dr. Esmond, no, I mean, it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just that typically, like, my problems that I have with pieces and just technically are a lot different than somebody that has had an approach.
You've discovered some new ones, yes.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. It's just ways of, ways you found, the problem actually was that you were creative in addressing problems. Mm-hmm. And so you came up with some answers that were actually fundamentally effective for your purposes. Yeah. But the one thing that you couldn't possibly have was the foresight to see where does this kind of technical trajectory lead over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'd never actually heard of tension before.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, just to put that in perspective, but and maybe clear up where you're coming from. I still think basically your answer is right. Problems are problems.
Yeah. Everybody comes with a different set.
Yeah.
How long after you guys finished school did you get your first job, and what was it?
Yeah. So, first job, that's tricky. First job can be hard to define.
Like a paycheck that...
A single paycheck from one source?
No, that like you had enough money to pay all your bills.
Oh, that was a few years ago. I guess certainly not after undergrad. I mean, when I got to New York for grad school, I had jobs, I had the gigs and all that kind of stuff, and I could, on some level, pay some bills. After I graduated, I was teaching at the prep school there. I had some private students of my own. I was playing viola. I was getting paid to play viola in the school orchestra. Yes, I did. And so I kind of pieced together a living that way. And I don't consider that not having a job, actually. I think a lot of people have very successful careers and lives doing something like that. I actually think I could see, you have to kind of, location may be fairly important for something like that, depending on what you're looking for. But if I'd stayed in New York, I'd probably be still doing basically that. Different groups, different whatever, but still kind of doing that. My quartet that I was pretty serious with then felt pulled in too many directions by all of our freelance work and knew that this was not going to go anywhere. And so we had a relationship with Utah State University. They brought us out several times to do workshops, 2 weeks at a time or something. And they were kind of trying to figure out how are we going to get this string program up and running. And we were trying to figure out how on earth are we going to pay our bills. And then we met a donor who gave the money and started the string quartet residency there. And we made basically a half-time salary, but we got retirement and health benefits.
Oh, wow.
And, rent was cheap out there. And they gave us, all we had to do was show up and teach about a dozen lessons a week and coach a few chamber music groups. There's zero work past that. So it was a lot of teaching, but it was a lot of freedom too. And then, well, anyway, the rest is in the bio.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel bad answering this question actually, because it went, you know, undergrad, master's, doctorate, job. I got the job that I had about a month to wonder what was next, and then I got a visiting position in Lubbock, Texas. Thought, well, I'll never stay there. And 10 years later, you know, I'm here. So I didn't. That was it. I just fell into it in a kind of fortuitous way. They had to hire someone real fast, because the previous occupant had left in a huff, and so there I was.
I guess for me, much like Marjorie describes, I mean, it was, you know, in grad school, you know, it was living so close to New York City and having so many friends that were working, work just sort of came. You didn't have to really look for it, and just a matter of working it at the schedule, and then, you know, just jobs led to more jobs. So once I got out of school, you know, there was plenty of freelance work to pay the bills, and even since the end of undergrad days, you know, I had begun this work overseas in Spain, working with the National Youth Orchestra, and I was going back, you know, 5, 6, 7 times a year to Spain for anything from 10 days to, in the summertime, a couple months maybe. And I mean, it got to the point, I remember kind of this realization at one point at the end of grad school that, you know, where, all right, am I going to move there and just work? Because the work in Spain led to work elsewhere in Europe, and then it dawned on me, I said, no, I love to travel there, but I have to invest myself more in what I want to do, what I've known for so long is a teaching job. So so many different sort of things that led to, there was a job at Moravian College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, north of Philadelphia. It was an adjunct position, but close enough to New York that it allowed, you know, me to keep those ties. I taught there for 2 years before the job opened up here. So, you know, it's just been a really fun and fortuitous roller coaster ride of, you know, freelance work, essentially. That just sort of led to what I do now.
The one bit of advice I always try to give is that even when you're working jobs that you think, I do not want to be doing this, take it seriously and do a good job, because you never know what's around. You never know who's going to call your current boss. You never know, you know, and if I look back on my life and my friends' lives, just the opportunities that unfolded in the most unusual ways. Because somebody, who was there? you know who? Oh, you know, and think, wow, I'm really glad I practiced for that one.
Oh yeah, and every once in a while, oh boy, I wish I'd practiced for that.
I'm really glad I kept my mouth shut, or I'm really glad I spoke up, or whatever it was, I mean, that led to those things. Just try to remember that sometimes in the most unusual ways, these little things actually lead to great opportunities.
Yeah, pointed at.
Well, and it's right. I mean, my first job, so they called teachers, and so first of all, it was just whichever teachers were kind of in town, and who responded, and so they had a candidate pool just based on teachers, you know, calling up, hey, who graduated recently, we need someone. And so Tim fed them his 2, you know, most recent graduates, and then I just, you know, I was at home in my parents' house. I didn't have my recordings. They were back in Long Island. And so I sent off the one thing I brought up to play for them, which was, you know, my final doctoral recital, which was these 12, you know, contemporary pieces written in 1976. I thought, well, you know, there it goes. But and so then it turns out it was John who was doing this, and it turns out that, you know, he actually knew about these pieces and was, you know, said, oh, wow, you know, how amazing that this person did this. You know, let's try them. And that was how that job happened. It was because of this otherwise completely bizarre, you know, choice of what to do for a doctoral project, and because, you know, someone happened to call back. I mean, so much of it is just being in, you know, having the right things. I've applied for other jobs, you know, never gotten so much as a nibble, nor would I have probably if it hadn't been for this special circumstances. So you just have to be ready to roll when that opportunity comes. Oh, I'm going to have to head. We're going to close this.
So I guess I'll just end with one more question. One more, I guess, because it sort of sums things up. But I guess what led you to become a university professor? Like you were saying earlier that you've always wanted to teach. What in particular, like there seems to be this private lessons versus public school. And I guess what drew you to the university collegiate type?
I mean, how or why, I had it in my head that so early that's what I want to do, I can't say, but I mean, I guess I would give initial credit to this man who started me in the school system, who was just, he was very sharp, and he was just very encouraging, and it seems like, you know, all the teachers after that it was just a great sequence that I enjoyed, and everything just kept supporting this idea that I had of what I wanted to do.
Yeah, you know, I didn't ever have any contact with public school music teaching because there just wasn't any where I grew up. There was a band guy who taught at 4 or 5 different schools. There was no orchestra anywhere, and so it just wasn't on my radar really until I got to college. You know, there have been moments in my life where I've thought about going different routes, taking orchestra auditions. I've sent in resumes, and then something else came along, and I moved on. Just a variety of different, moments at which you kind of pick a road. But my dad is a university professor. I grew up on a small college campus. And loved that atmosphere. And, when my quartet had the residency, it just sort of kept reaffirming that I knew I really liked teaching by that point. I knew that I found it intriguing and challenging. And I think one of the joys of university teaching for me is kind of outside the normal that you might expect, which is, getting to work with students and all that part of it, is that I am encouraged to go out and play. I mean, frankly, we have to do that if we want to get tenure or promotion. It's required. And so that fits really well with what I want to do with my life. I don't have to take every gig that comes my way because I can pay my bills. Yay. And it allows a great deal of freedom in terms of what I play and what I get, where I put my time in that way. And that just seems about ideal to me for my desires.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's, Tim, my teacher, previous, when in sort of these career talks, he basically said, look, you're always going to be doing these things. You're going to be performing, you're going to be teaching, you're going to be playing chamber music. And everything feeds off of everything else. Don't look at yourself. The second that you put up these walls and say, I am this, then you're actually shutting off the way those things feed into one another. So as you start build your career, just work on all of those aspects simultaneously and enjoy the ride. And I found that to be very good advice. I mean, it happened for me that I got a university teaching position, and that tends to lead to more, or you stay at the same one, or you don't. But I've never thought of it as sort of defining I'm a musician. I'm a teacher, a performer, and then this job is this sort of thing that is sort of my home base and that I consider very important, but it doesn't define. So I don't think of myself first and foremost as a professor, although sometimes it's more convenient to describe myself that way to people. Nor do I. You know what I mean? If that seems clear, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So.
I think Marjorie, her comment about just how it affords us the luxury of being able to pursue, so many different things, or so many different aspects of what it is to be